Welcome to Something to Say, where we bring voices from diverse backgrounds who will share their unique stories and perspectives on finding their passion and provide insights on how you can find yours. Join us as host Greg DeShields guides us through this enlightening journey.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this special podcast webinar this afternoon. And in the true spirit of efficiency, we promise you that this session will last for only 30 minutes. I'm Greg DeShields. I'm the host and the producer of Something to Say podcast, and we are thrilled that you're joining for the session today, creating your podcast and finding the right distribution platform. Our objective today is to talk to you about how we began Something to Say podcast, give you some insights about how the podcast itself was created, but more importantly, to turn it over to the second portion of our conversation with Angel Levis, who is the founder and CEO of the Podcast Network, to talk about this amazing platform, which we are proud to be a part of, and how you would go about distributing your podcast to a variety of different outlets. So starting a podcast is really no easy thing. And I thought one of the things that I would do in order to begin the conversation today is to just begin by at least acknowledging by way of thank you those who made this possible. So once again, Angel Levis, who is the founder and CEO of Alive Podcast Network, thank you so much for joining us today and providing your insight in terms of this very interesting and exciting industry. I'd love to give a big shout out to Mohammed Adnan, and he is without any doubt the lifeblood, the heart of Something to Say podcast. And for those of you who don't know, he's in Pakistan. So thank you for joining us. He does all of our post production and is an amazingly talented young man. So I'll give even further shout out to him as we go along. I'd also like to give a shout out to Bridget Battles. She is without any doubt one of the most accomplished brand experts that I know and was the creative force behind us producing this webinar. So, Bridget, thank you so much for helping us bring this to life and to be a part of the project. And then finally, I'd like to thank, of course, all of you in the audience, but a big shout out to everyone who has been a guest on Something to Say. Your insights, your passion, your point of view, your overall just support of the project has been amazing. And we look forward to many others to join us as we move forward on our journey about Something to Say. All right, so why don't we start with sharing some of the more meat and potatoes associated, or I should say, some of the hard hitting news about Something to Say podcast. So there are some real numbers that are associated with it. Now, once again, these numbers are representative of the work that we've done with Something to Say, and without any doubt, it would probably change per podcast. And Angel may have some insights as we go along and talk about it from a distribution perspective. But yay, we are at 21 episodes. The milestone is 50. So, as excited as I am about 21, I should point out that when we hit 50, that's really the time to pop the champagne. Although we could probably open up a small little bottle of vodka or something like that for this. We opted to go with a 25-minute podcast. We felt it was really important that it's a single listen. We do not have commercials. So the idea is that you would probably listen to it on your way to somewhere, and there'd probably be no reason to split it. Some of the best practices is that you're somewhere between 20 to maybe 40 minutes. So we hit it at about 25. Our costs, and I should point out to you that the cost can vary in a variety of different ways. Just the way that we establish Something to Say, our cost is about $400 per episode. Now, there's post production costs, there's equipment costs, there's some subscription costs, and we always want to find a way to bring those costs down. But I would be remiss if I did not engage in a conversation about starting a podcast and not at all discuss the issue associated with costs. Downloads and listens, there's some who would maybe want to see those two numbers separate. I kind of like to throw them both together, especially with the way that people consume podcasts today. So for us, when we aggregated all of our numbers in terms of the analytics, we found that there's roughly about 250 listens or combined listens and downloads per week. We feature one episode for 2 weeks, so that's close to about 500. So for those who are a featured guest, it's a very attractive number when you are presenting it to them as to what their visibility would be when they participate as an individual. We also do YouTube. It had been recommended from the very onset that we use it as a way for individuals who'd like to consume a podcast by visually being engaged. So we've been able to capture by way of full length episodes and numerous clips that are made. We do produce roughly two 1 minute or a minute and a half clip that individuals can consume either on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. And that has generated 100 views. And I would point out to you, if you do opt to go with YouTube, there's some fantastic analytics that you will get that helps to provide you an insight as to the impact that you have by having your platform featured there or your show featured there. The number of social media views. So we have found that 9,000 is the total number since the inception of Something to Say, which is on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is our primary source in terms of where we release our podcast. We release our podcasts on Fridays at 5 o'clock with the hope that individuals will consume them for the weekend. Follow up to LinkedIn, about 8,000 individuals have had impressions on Facebook, 5,000 on Instagram, and 3,000 on X. So for us, a big emphasis in terms of really being able to promote the release of any of the episodes are centered upon the use of LinkedIn as well as Facebook. I should also point out, though, that we do have our own website, which is Something to Say with GregDeshields.com, which gives information about upcoming website or upcoming interviews, as well as some of the previous interviews, and it links everybody to those. And then the last, what was our most popular episode? An Unpack DEI. It was a pretty exciting podcast. It was a special one. We did a part one and we did a part two. And the guest was absolutely fantastic. They did mass distribution. So I would say that it probably was our top one, not in popularity, but certainly in distribution. So the numbers do make a difference when you are producing a podcast. But along with that, there are some other areas of interest or concern that you should take into account. And I just want to cover a few of those before we start to switch over. So the first is about creating a podcast. So branding is really important. We wanted to keep ours very simple. So Something to Say we felt was pretty straightforward with an image of a microphone, but I would encourage you to think about that. And it also ties into the intro and the outro that you might design because there really has to be a clear message that your audience will connect with. I'd also say in creating it, post production is incredibly important. Sound, quality, consistently, all of that stuff is just hugely important. And that's why, as I have earlier pointed out, that Mohammed Adnan has been amazing for us. I don't know if we could do it if we didn't have Mohammed, or if we did, we'd have to come up with some other incredibly talented person. But post production is really going to be key in terms of how you're able to produce a quality podcast. Selecting the host. I was convenient enough to do it, but I will identify myself as both the host and the producer. And maybe as we go along in future episodes, I may opt to step back instead and be a producer and focus on a host who can really bring even more of a talent component to it. But for now, I kind of work both. So I would encourage you maybe not to be wedded with just perhaps yourself being the host. Maybe you might see it evolving as you go forward. The production is really what's most important, getting quality guests and having really engaging conversation that really makes a difference as it connects with your audience. YouTube or not, I would strongly say yes, but editing YouTube is not the same as editing the audio. It's a lot more complicated and a lot more sophisticated for it to look as good as it should. But it really enhances your distribution and the awareness of it. So I would certainly encourage you to think about that. I also encourage you to have your own website. It's where you can put a lot more content than just the distribution that you might have, especially as it relates to serving each one of your episodes through your distribution. So we've created a website. It has a lot more information. All of what has been associated with the podcast is there. More information about the post production, the host. So I would consider that I would strongly recommend that you do create your own website. The frequency of when you release, we release every 2 weeks. There's about 39% of podcasts that are released in that time frame, so I would certainly encourage you to do that. And then, like I said, we're 25 minutes, but the frequency is about 20 to 40 minutes, and 31% of podcasts fall in that space. So that's about where you'd want to be. Selecting a guest, just get as many interesting people who are very wonderfully engaged in conversation to move your podcast forward. I'll be honest with you, you probably have some really good friends who are great talker and have very authentic conversations, and I would encourage you to begin with that. June Seminario from Intercontinental Hotels was our first, and she was absolutely fantastic. She loves wine, and she talked a lot about some of the great vineyards in Europe. And I just felt that she was a fantastic person to launch the podcast. So I would strongly recommend that you are engaged with people who love to talk, who are very interesting, and certainly can bring a great deal of interesting dialogue to your audience. So let's just talk about the interviews that you have. I would strongly encourage you to build a bit of an outline. We create a script so that individuals know where we are going in the conversation. We start with an introduction. From an introduction, we do an icebreaker. We engage in tell me your story. We talk about business. And then we offer up 4 questions to whoever we are interviewing. We essentially allow them an opportunity to talk about what they want to talk about. And then the last question that we ask them is, this is something to say. So what do you have to say? And we cover all of that in 25 minutes. Well, maybe not exactly in 25. Mohammed takes care of all of that. But I will tell you that without any doubt, having a script makes it a lot easier and a lot more comfortable for the individuals that you interview. In terms of equipment, try and invest in the highest quality that you can. We use a Zoom platform. We certainly will evolve in terms of our speaker quality because we know that sound will certainly impact individuals as you go forward, as well as camera use. So think in terms of the equipment, and that goes back to the cost factor that I mentioned and what type of investment you want to make. I would say make the largest investment you can on the front end because it's kind of difficult to do the catch up as you go further along. What questions to ask? There are a myriad of questions that you can ask. I think as you engage with any of your guests, just make sure that you're not blindsiding people. People really want to feel as though that they can have a very genuine conversation and know in advance of what the conversation will be. How do you edit? You work very closely with what is the most relevant and succinct points associated with your podcast. So just make sure that you have someone who's very skilled and very talented at capturing the salient points. And once again, Mohammed is fantastic at that in order to maintain a very straightforward conversation that has a nice flow to it that engages individuals from the very beginning until we're done. So, in terms of the episode, and then we'll turn over shortly to begin to have a conversation with the distribution with Angel. So, one of the things that I would say that's really important about each one of the episodes is write a good description. And when you write that description, you want to be mindful of what content will be covered that will be engaging to draw people in. So, be mindful of the description because you're going to carry it through a variety of different sources in order to make people aware about your particular podcast. Make sure you get great headshots and great logos. That combination of graphics can be used over and over and over again in a way that really engage people. And you'll be surprised. A lot of your guests will have some fantastic photos, and you want to be able to draw back from them and add that to your library and use it as you continuously go forward. And then in just 1 minute, we'll turn it over to Angel and I'll start engaging with her on some questions. But the last thing I would say is always write your show notes and come up with some great keywords. For your search engine optimization, you want to be very mindful of the words that you've selected so that you're easily found when individuals are searching you on Google. All right, so with that, I want to turn it over to Angel Levis, who has been absolutely fantastic to work over at Alive Podcast Network. So I want to be mindful of time. So, Angel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you definitely for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Before I go into the distribution stuff, I just kind of want to add a few things and maybe, yeah, to some of the things that you mentioned earlier. I think that like the number one thing that any podcaster needs to do is understand who their audience is. Because if you don't know who your audience is, then you're going to miss the mark and you're just going to be creating content that may be relevant to this person, may not, but they'll have no loyalty to keep coming back if you're kind of just if you don't know what it is that they desire to know. The other thing that I would say in regards to both the episode and your shows, be very intentional in understanding why you have this podcast. I think that there is an influx of individuals who have podcasts just to say that they have one, but have an end game in mind. Like, why do you have it? What are you servicing? How are you aiding to others? And so I think that's like really important. Now, in regards to a network on the distribution, you definitely want to distribute to as many places as possible, but in working with the network, you want to make sure that you're staying abreast of all of the different opportunities that being in that network will afford you. With the Alive Podcast Network, we were very intentional around having our own proprietary app to be able to help people generate revenue. So that was one of the things that I don't know if we really hit on yet, but the monetization is, in my opinion, really key. So anyone who is on our network, they have the opportunity to promote, like, hey, support this podcast by downloading the Alive Podcast Network app, as a portion of your monthly subscription fee will go to support this podcast. The more that our hosts tell that, the greater response that they have in regards to generating revenue. Places that we distribute outside of our app, we're now in the process of building out ad sales. And so, regardless of where your numbers are, our goal is to help make sure that our creatives are able to bring in some form of revenue, whether it's in app or externally. I think the other thing that's key is like Gregory so eloquently stated was, you want to make sure your production quality is good. We have a virtual studio that's available to all of our hosts. And in our virtual studio, it allows you to gauge like what the audio levels are and things like that. We also now have a booking relationship where we're able to help our hosts find guests for their podcast. So finding a distribution partner and a podcast network that is in alignment with what your needs are, because you understand the why of what your podcast is designed to do and why each episode is as important as it is, then your network can help further elevate you and your visibility. The other thing that we do at our network is we are very intentional around pushing out monthly press releases, weekly newsletters, and just different communications to be able to amplify the work of not just some of our hosts, but everyone. But it's also the host's responsibility to connect with their content manager, let them know, hey, we have this going on to help us amplify the work that they're doing. Did you have any other like things that you wanted me to hit on?
I do. So I wanted to talk about the uniqueness of the Alive Podcast Network because there are a lot of other distribution platforms that people could choose. But can you talk about the uniqueness of Alive? I mean, I know why I joined it, but maybe you could give some insight of what it really means to be a part of a group like Alive.
Yeah, so I think some of the uniqueness is like the monetization factor that I mentioned, like in really being able to not just be a part of a community that's very niche, because we are the home of Black voices. While that is true, we're open and everybody enjoys the content that is on the platform. It's just that the voices that you hear as hosts are there's a Black voice in at least one of the show, one of the as one of the hosts on the shows. But I think a lot of people are drawn to it because it's also the community aspect. We're very big on making sure that our hosts have the opportunity to collaborate with one another. We just formed a relationship with Revolt where we don't have to be the end all be all. Like, yes, we will be the number one place for Black content. However, we can still partner with others to amplify the voices of our hosts. To us, from the host perspective, that is what our number one goal is. From the listener's perspective, it's being able to provide them as much information and resources as possible and putting that in the palm of their hand.
So, in terms of the future of podcasting, I know you've been very busy, engaged in a great deal of some of the more cutting edge aspects of podcasting. Can you give us some of the benefit of what you've been able to gather from the most recent conventions and other networking that you've done?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research that has recently come out that essentially states that podcasting is not going anywhere. It's only growing. And the unfortunate part is I feel like the Black community is always kind of last to the party. And so there's just been this surge in listenership from the Black community, which is great. But it's like, why do we always have to be last? Why can't we why can't we lead the fort in some of these things with the tech? But the numbers are showing that there are more and more listeners of Black descent that are very big on podcasting and they're looking for podcasts that speak to them. And so that is like amazing. On the flip side, there's also advertisers that want to hit and target that demographic as well. So a podcast lends the opportunity for advertisers to want to partner with more and more Black creatives so that they can hit the Black consumer. With that being said, the listeners are more inclined, based on studies, to purchase from a host of a podcast than any other medium because they have built trust
Mm.
with that host because a podcast is a very intimate medium. And so that I think is a very pivotal moment right now because there is this surge in
Mm.
Black listeners, there's this surge and advertisers wanting to target them. But then because of the trust factor, it lends an amazing opportunities for hosts at this moment. And being a part of a network, specifically a Black owned network that understands like what's needed to amplify Black voices is it's a great opportunity. And being in a network for most Black hosts, their content don't have millions and millions of listeners, right? Or it just takes a long time, or they have already had that visibility.
Mhm.
And being with a network that is very niche, like Alive, what it does is an advertiser is more inclined to come to us and say, hey, you may have this show that has millions of listeners, and you may have this show that doesn't have that many. It's a newer type show. We're willing to go across network and do an ad buy.
Mhm.
And as an independent podcaster, that's a lot less likely
Mm.
that you'll have a major brand come to you and say, hey, you only have so many listeners per month, but we want to do an ad buy with you. But that is an opportunity that's available to the smaller type podcasts that are a part of a network.
So I have to admit, one of the big excitements I get is when I'm in my car and I'm either on Pandora or I'm on Spotify or I'm on YouTube and my podcast pops up. So can you talk about like which one should we really be excited about being on? Because I have to admit, when I saw that I had a representation on Spotify, it was pretty exciting. So
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's the more the merrier, right? Like we want you everywhere. We want, because everybody has a different preference of where they listen.
mm,
Everybody has a different platform that they like to listen on. And so I don't think it's really like, oh, it's better to be here. However, when you do see your content pop up and it's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm here." Or I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but I mean, I have kids, and so they'll be like, "Alexa, play da 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 da, whatever podcast." And when it starts to play, it's like, "Oh my god, I didn't know my podcast was even up there." You know what I mean? And she just started talking. It's one of those moments where it's just like, Oh, wow. Like, I'm really out there.
So we have a few more minutes left, and we really didn't get to know you. Can you tell us how you evolved into this particular role?
So I ended up in this. Like, I've been in media for going on 25 years. And in working in the media space, like, I just saw that there was a huge disparity between how Black creatives and entertainment were treated versus their white counterparts. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to create a space where we were equal, the playing fields were equal, and the opportunity for monetization and stimulating the Black creative economy wasn't just a phrase, but something that was actually a tangible goal. And so that's why Alive was created. I created a lot of amazing shows for a lot of amazing people throughout the trajectory of my career. And now I get to do it with even more amazing and talented people who may not have as well-known names or as well-known voices, but what they know and how they are a subject matter expert in their respective industries is a beautiful thing to be able to celebrate and amplify.
Well, I have to tell you, I remember there was a rainy day that I was watching a bit of a news broadcast on one of the networks, and they were featuring you and the launch of the Alive podcast network. And I was like, I have to contact her. And within just a few short days, the number of people who had joined the platform had just like doubled or quadrupled in just such a short period of time. And I felt like this is definitely something that I had to be a part of. And I will share with everybody in the audience that our affiliation with the Live Podcast Network has been an incredible asset as we draw a sense of awareness and brand and quality to our podcast. So I would also emphasize as you develop your podcast, having the opportunity to be affiliated with an Alive podcast network is a huge, huge benefit because they may not necessarily be able to connect clearly with you as a brand, but it builds your brand when you're affiliated. And when you visit the website and it's in the back of Angel, I mean, you see all of these great, podcasters that you're now a part of, and you're all telling these different stories. So from the perspective of the folks at Something to Say, our affiliation with the Live Podcast Network has been wonderful. So this is one of those testimonies that you could take and say, take a listen to this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Angel, I'd really like to thank you so much for being a guest and a partner with us here on Something to Say. Once again, a big shout out to Mohammed Adnan, who is going to take this and convert it into one of the best clips, if not one of the best YouTube videos. And then to Bridget Battles, who, like I said, was the brainchild behind this. And thank you for helping this come to life. And then for those of you who joined us live today, and certainly for those of you who will take a listen in future episodes on Something to Say, thank you for your support. We have a lot more content coming out shortly. And in the true world of efficiency, with about 30 seconds left, I'd like to say thank you for joining us here on Something to Say podcast. And we will see you again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to Something to Say. We trust you found some valuable insights and takeaways that can help you find your passion. Don't miss out on future episodes. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on your preferred platform. We value your feedback and suggestions, so let us know how we can serve you better. Keep the conversation going and stay inspired until we meet again. Take care and happy listening.